everyone, and welcome to tonight's Women in Law seminar. If I could firstly just ask you all just to keep yourselves on mute and your cameras off, just to prevent any feedback if possible, please. My name is Leila Kendi and I'm the Treasurer of the Scottish Young Lawyers Association and also a trainee solicitor at Lydiam Chalmers. I'm delighted to see so many of you here this evening, albeit virtually. Our annual event brings together a number of high-profile and inspirational women from the legal community, and this year is no exception to that. This year has also allowed us to reach out to speakers further afield, and we have a fantastic lineup once again. We have Lee Hurd, we have Jane Edward and Lady Hale joining us. At the end, we will begin our panel Q&A session, and our speakers will be happy to answer any questions, so please do use the chat function, which will allow you to facilitate this. So I will be co-chairing the event tonight alongside Lucy Thornton, our co-chair, who is a solicitor at Anderson Strathern and also a past president of the Scottish Young Lawyers Association. So tonight would not be possible without our sponsor, Fraser Irvine Sheriff Officers, who continue to support this annual event year on year, and we're particularly grateful this year given obviously the difficulties of 2020. Fraser Irvine is a firm of messengers at arms and sheriff officers who provide bespoke services to the Scottish legal market. I will now pass over to Alex Irvine at Fraser Irvine, who is one of the partners of the firm.
Thank you, Leila. I'm not going to say very much at the moment, other than to also pass on a welcome to everyone, and what a fantastic turnout tonight. So many names popping up on the screen. I just want to pay tribute to SYLA and their committee, Leila in particular, for organising yet another fantastic Women in Law event, and we are particularly pleased that we're able to support this event every year. And it looks like we're going to have another fantastic evening tonight, even though we can't come together. We're all together remotely. It's nice to be able to put on our good clothes, even if it's just over the video, although I must admit that I struggled to button my collar up. So I think I'll have some more long walks in the weeks ahead. But do enjoy the evening. Let me encourage you at the end, when the Q&A session starts, to take the opportunity to ask questions. It's a fantastic opportunity, so please do that. Make the most of our evening together. And it's great as well that we're able to support a fantastic charity, which we'll be hearing about in a few moments. But have a great evening. SYLA really is an organisation that I think epitomises the theme of Women in International Women's Day this year, Women in Leadership. Just looking at some of the names on the screen, I see so many past presidents, all females, forging a career in the law. And so let's celebrate International Women's Day yesterday, but also our event tonight, and have a great time. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Alex for his kind words there, and a big thank you to Fraser Irvine Sheriff Officers for their ongoing support over the years. So just by attending tonight, you have all raised over £1,300 for our charity partner, SAMH. Before we hear from tonight's wonderful panel, I'm delighted to welcome Katrina Headley, who's going to say a few words about this incredible charity and the work that they do. Katrina is a treasurer of SAMH and an associate at Digby Brown Solicitors, and it is even more special to welcome her here tonight as Katrina served as SYLA president from 2010 to 2012. I understand it was Katrina who in fact established the SYLA Women in Law event 9 years ago. Welcome back, Katrina, and I will now pass over to you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I really can't express how proud I am to see that the SYLA continues to be so strong and continues to run the Women in Law event 9 years after we established it in 2012. I was looking back at around about that time, and the Scotsman did an article about the Women in Law event and the fact that we were having it, and the language that we used then, and I was very cautious about using the F word, feminism, in that article and describing the event, and you know, it was talking about the things that still had to happen. And I think I breezily said that I hope that in 10 years' time, you know, there wouldn't still be, you know, the equality issues would be so much better. Now, I wonder if some of our speakers tonight will reflect on, I guess, where we've gone and where we need to go. But I was reflecting on how that is linked to also the conversation regarding mental health. Because equally as in 9 years ago, the conversations that we had about women in law or even women in law events or feminism would have been very different to the ones we have now. The same is true for mental health. And I think that it is one of the great progress stories of the last 5 years is the changing conversation around mental health. And SAMH, Scotland's largest and leading mental health charity, has really been at the forefront of that. And it's been the second only privilege of my life after being SYLA president to be a trustee of SAMH since 2016. And, you know, SAMH have been running since 1923. And we really are at the forefront of making the change, and not just around the narrative and how we speak about it, but actual actions and deeds rather than just words. So please go to our website, samh.org.uk, and there's lots of ways to get involved, particularly in the run up to the Scottish Parliament elections, which will be in May. We're asking people to join our campaign to make sure that all people and candidates who are standing up for Scotland's mental health. So there's lots of ways. So thank you so much to everyone for the donation tonight. It will not be wasted, I can assure you. And I'm delighted that we'll be going forward. So I'll pass it back, but my last words would be just to reflect that, you know, in the last 9 years, we really have changed the conversation regarding feminism and mental health. But in the next 9 years, I would love to see more of those words reflecting in actions seen. So it's a real pleasure. Thank you so much from the board of SAMH and everyone there. And I can't wait to hear the speakers that you're all here to hear as well. Thank you very much, Lucy.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Katrina, for that. It's great that we're able to support SAMH this year. We recently ran an event with them and are hoping to run more in future for our members, so it's wonderful. So next, I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Lee Hurd, who graduated from the University of Glasgow and now works as a Property and Infrastructure Disputes Associate at Shepherd and Wedderburn. He sits as Treasurer of the Scottish branch of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and was recently awarded Rising Star of the Year at the virtual Scottish Legal Awards in 2020. So thank you, Lee. I'll pass you over to you.
Thank you, Leila, and good evening, everyone, all 200 plus of you. I'd like to start by just thanking SYLA for asking me to be part of tonight's event. It's a genuine honour to be asked to be part of Women in Law, particularly so in this year. It's such an esteemed panel. I too am looking forward to hearing from Jane and Lady Hale later on in the event. I've been asked to speak to you tonight about my experiences and achievements in my career to date, and also touch on work-life balance and how we're all managing during the pandemic. So as set out there by Leila, I started my legal career studying the LLB at the University of Glasgow. Like I'm sure a lot of you can relate to, I started off life at university not knowing much about the different areas of law and what I really wanted to do. When it came to honours, I was still pretty unsure, but I managed to buy myself some time by going on exchange to the University of Toronto in Canada. Going on exchange was truly one of the best things I ever did, and I learned so much in my time in Canada and made some great lifelong friends. It also gave me the opportunity to travel and learn lots about different cultures and countries from other international students. And I mentioned that just so if there's any law students on the call today and they're considering an exchange in future, I would say definitely do it. You won't regret it. So returning from Canada, I went into my 4th year of the LLB, and I had to finally choose my honours. At that point, I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do when I grew up, but I chose medical law, family law, and professional negligence, and thought, well, that's a mixed bag. I was lucky to be taught by professional negligence by the wonderful Professor Robert Rennie, who passed away recently. And again, I'm sure lots of you in the call also were taught by Professor Rennie and his lessons and various stories about poor Mrs. McGlumphy and Newton Nairns, who got into all sorts of trouble, has really stuck with me throughout my career. So it's during fourth year that everyone starts talking about traineeships and what you want to do. Although that was now over a decade for me, which is hard to believe, I do remember the stress well. Long application forms, decisions about what firms to apply for and what you wanted to do. I applied to a few big commercial firms at the time, thinking that would give me a mixture of seats and opportunities, and I could really park what I wanted to do until later. Shepherd and Wedderburn was my first interview and my first job offer, and I took it and considered myself sorted. During my diploma year, where I also studied at Glasgow, I started to realise a few areas of law that I did enjoy, civil litigation and corporate. But I did also use my diploma year, as I urge any students on this call to do the same, is just to make the most of uni life before entering the world of work. I was heavily involved in the Music Society at university and became the wind band coordinator for the uni. A few of us on diploma also formed a social committee and organised various events and the diploma ball. And again, if there's any students on the call, I just say get involved in all these non-law sort of activities when you're at university. It's a great way to meet people. You find out more about yourself and you just have a good time. So following a summer of travelling around Eastern Europe in 2012, I started my traineeship at Shepherd and Wedderburn. My first seat was corporate, and I'd chosen this as I enjoyed it on diploma, and I wasn't sure what a lot of the other teams did at the time. I had a great 6 months in the firm's Glasgow office. I liked the work, the people, and by then I thought, great, I'm going to be a corporate lawyer, and that's what I thought I was going to do. My second seat, I went on to do a secondment to one of the firm's clients, Vattenfall, who's one of Europe's largest producers of electricity and heat. In the UK, they're most known for on and offshore wind. During my time there, although based in Edinburgh, I did get to travel a lot across the UK, which was great, and get involved in lots of different kinds of work. It was also really good at an early stage of my career to get an insight into a client's organisation and really understand what clients look for from external lawyers. It was during this time that I came across the Blackberry test, showing my age here, that was important for clients. So basically making sure that you summarise your view or advice succinctly in communications so that it can be read on the go, as a lot of clients pre-COVID were certainly in that camp. Another highlight for me on my secondment was I got to go to an opening of one of the wind farms and see turbines up close to just see how large they are. And it really brought about what I was drafting about and on calls about all day, just really come to life. And also being involved during the time when the Aberdeen offshore wind farm project was ongoing, there was also legal interventions being made by Donald Trump at the time. And I was having to keep an eye on the quarter session petition walls to see if anything was happening. So that was quite exciting. When I returned to Shepherd and Wedderburn for my third seat, I asked to do litigation. This was the other area I enjoyed on diploma, and although at this point I was completely set on corporate law, I thought it would be prudent to at least try litigation and just rule it out. Well, 3 months into that seat, I completely changed my mind. I was in contentious construction, and I loved it. I had my first adjudication quite early on in the seat, and for those of you who aren't involved in construction disputes, that's a fast-track dispute resolution process. And I just loved it. Its fast-paced nature meant I could really get involved even as a trainee. I got to do some drafting, got to take ownership of documents, discuss matters with clients, and I really felt like part of the S&W team and the wider client team in that case very quickly. So that, I guess, is the start of my love for construction disputes. During that seat, one of my colleagues announced she was going on maternity leave, and that was just going to leave at the time myself as a trainee and the partner I worked for, Ian Drummond. So instead of being intimidated by this, although I confess I definitely was at the beginning, I took this as a learning opportunity to ask lots of questions, sit in lots of meetings and calls, and really got to understand not only the technical side of construction, but really how we can help clients and our role in getting clients to a place where they've resolved all their issues. An NQ role was advertised in the team, and I applied for it. And it's strange to think it's almost exactly 7 years ago today that I accepted that job. So I've been there for a while. So by then I'm a solicitor in the property and infrastructure disputes team. And I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. Always been keen to learn. And so towards the end of my traineeship, I signed up to the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators Introduction to ADR course. So this gave me more of an insight into different types of ADR, including adjudication, which I was becoming very familiar with, and just to meet some more contacts in the industry. I completed my assignment and became an associate of the Institute. And I got in for punishment. I asked what came next, which was the membership exams. That involved more exams, this time on contract law, delicts, evidence, and the law of arbitration. But I spoke to my team about it and signed up. And this was my start of my relationship with the Institute, as Leila mentioned in my introduction. During the end of the membership course, I wanted to get more involved in the CIR. So I spoke to Ian about it and suggested that maybe I could get involved in the Young Members Group. Ian asked why I hadn't considered joining the Scottish Branches Committee, so not just the Young Members one. Genuinely, the thought hadn't occurred to me. I considered that to be for people with far more experience than I had, and didn't think I would be sort of good enough to do that. However, with some encouragement, I approached the then Honorary Secretary, Richard Farndale, about how I could get involved in the committee. And I did apply to the committee and was accepted and became a full member in April 2016. I did at the beginning cover the role of the Young Members Convener to cover a maternity leave, but then became Honorary Secretary and Treasurer in early 2017. So between then and now, I've had various career highlights, including a secondment to one of my clients, Scottish Power. I became an associate in 2019. I'm currently an external examiner for the LLM in construction law at the University of Strathclyde, and of course, the Rising Star Award at the Scottish Legal Awards last year. So it's been a busy but exciting few years. So that's me. So coming on to challenges I've been asked to talk about. In the firm in Shepherd and Wedderburn, I'm a member of what's called S&W Together groups, which promote diversity and inclusion within the firm. So I'm involved in the Gender Focus Group and the Healthy Working Lives and Disability Group. So my involvement in both of these groups is personal and comes on to two issues I want to talk about today. The first, of course, being a woman working in law, and particularly construction law, and the challenges this presents. And secondly, my own personal challenges managing a busy legal career with lupus. So starting with the second one, I was diagnosed with lupus during my traineeship. So some of you may have heard of this. It became a bit more mainstream when Kim Kardashian thought she might have had it last year. But back in 2013, I hadn't, and it was pretty terrifying being diagnosed with this. It's an autoimmune disease not dissimilar to MS, and symptoms can vary from person to person, but can include fatigue, joint pain, etc. I was at the beginning of my career at that point, and on secondment to a client, and I was given this news. I'll be honest, I was worried for my future career, how colleagues and clients may treat me, whether I'd be able to perform alongside my counterparts, male and female. And due to these worries, I didn't want to tell anyone that I was working with that I had this condition. I didn't want to be treated differently, and I didn't want it to define me. I did keep it a secret for about 18 months, but eventually I did confide in colleagues, and all my worries were for nothing. Nothing changed. The only difference was I could be more open about my condition, and if I was feeling fatigued or having a flare, I could now be honest about it and manage it in the open. It's a big decision to be open about a condition like that, but I do now make a point about mentioning it, although not excessively, particularly to junior colleagues, because you just never know what someone else is going through. And I hope that me being open about my condition encourages others to feel that they could speak about any worries they may have, and also to show it's still possible to have a career and manage whatever you've got going on in the background. Okay, so now let's move on to what I'm sure we'll talk about more in this session, the challenge of being a woman in law. I'd be lying if I said there was no challenge, and I've always been treated the same by my male counterparts in all walks of life, but you all know that already. What I would say is, to echo what Katrina said, is that it's getting better. I can honestly say at my firm, Shepherd and Wedderburn, and in my team, I haven't been treated differently due to my gender. A very supportive boss and a really good team. That doesn't mean that the firm, like all firms, don't face challenges in this area, including around the partnership and making life at the firm possible for working parents. However, I do feel supported and optimistic then about future prospects. Outside the firm in the legal world, I have faced challenges being a woman. Firstly, just that construction is a male-dominated sector. More and more women are joining the profession, but it still remains heavily male. And it's not unusual for me to be at a meeting, or these days a Zoom call or Teams call, with only men. I used to find that really intimidating, particularly I think when you're a junior lawyer and you're just not as confident in your own abilities and you feel that you have that extra step to prove by being a woman. I think this is particularly the case for me, given some people see my name in emails and assume I'm a man, so then get a surprise on a call or a meeting. I do still come across this from time to time, but with more experience, I think you become more sure in yourself. So I think just, be confident and confident in what you're doing. If there are any junior lawyers who are listening and do feel like this, I'd encourage you just to keep going. I recently read a book by Shelley Archambault. It's called Unapologetically Ambitious. And she mentions that women in these situations have what's dubbed imposter syndrome. Essentially, it's quite interesting that women are more likely than men to have imposter syndrome, which is where you question whether you're good enough or experienced enough to take on a task or a piece of work. Studies have shown that this might be why you get more senior roles going to men in big organisations, because women can be guilty of being their worst enemy, their worst criticism. And now, without turning this into a therapy session or some sort of cheesy tagline, I just want to say to everyone that you are all worth it, and just tell yourself you can do this. However, the book I mentioned earlier did give this useful piece of advice that I'll share, which is that if you can't do that, if you can't give yourself a shake and give yourself confidence, then have confidence in the person that put you forward for the job or the role or the task. They think you're worth it and they think they can do it. You can do it. So have confidence in them if you can't have confidence in you. And we almost got to the end of my session without speaking about the pandemic. We're all acutely aware of the difficulties it's having on the economy, and will do for some time, and we can't change that. But what we can do is look at the opportunities that have come out of COVID, especially for us women in law. Firstly, I think the move away from paper. For me, in the world of disputes, particularly litigation, it was really difficult to move away from paper and hard copies. I think the courts in particular have adapted really well, and you can now get a summons signated electronically within about an hour without running up to Parliament Hall and working out if you've got the right pieces of paper at the General Department. I'll perhaps defer to Lady Hale for her views on how the courts have handled COVID. Secondly, the move to agile or flexible working. That was happening pre the pandemic, but I really do think COVID has really put it forward. The benefits of this will be for home working or part-time home working to just be accepted as the norm if you want it to be an option, and people being able to manage busy careers in their personal life with more balance. We often hear the phrase work-life balance, and I think Layla mentioned it when she was asking me to speak tonight. I personally prefer work-life integration. It's about establishing a work schedule that fits into your life and works for you. I think what the pandemic has shown us is that we can all work very differently in different ways, but still get the job done and achieve results. And my hope is that firms and businesses will take these lessons and encourage employees to think about a working pattern that best works for them as individuals and as the firm, as the business, as opposed to just having a strict set of working hours in a physical office. For me personally, working from home has been great because avoiding the commute helps me manage my condition better. And it's certainly something I'll be doing long term. Thirdly and finally, mental health, as we talked about earlier, is becoming less of a taboo. And I do think that COVID has helped with that. Prior to the pandemic, you know, there was still in the industry some stigma around mental health, although it was becoming more open. In our office, we have mental health first aiders and everyone's encouraged to speak about mental health. I think during the pandemic, it's been even more important to check on colleagues and friends and families. And it's really okay not to be okay. And I hope that firms and businesses continue to engage with their employees on these issues when we go back to the office, whatever that looks like. Now, I think that's me out of time. So I will hand over back to Layla, and thank you everyone for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Lee, for that insight into your own experiences and your career to date. I think your advice to be open with colleagues really is so important, especially now, possibly now more than ever. So thank you for your contribution tonight. I'm thrilled to introduce our next speaker, Jane Edward. Jane graduated from the University of Glasgow in 1996 and completed her traineeship in Edinburgh and Glasgow with Bird Semple, now known as DLA Piper. She qualified in 1999 and joined Slaughter & May in London in 2001. In 2006, she became the first female real estate partner at Slaughter & May, and she now heads up that team. Jane is ranked in both chambers and the Legal 500, and I'm delighted to welcome her here today. I'll pass over to you, Jane. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you so much for that introduction. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us, and thank you, Lee, for that really interesting insight into your career. And I agree with all of what you said. Just then to cover, I guess, my experiences to date, and to hopefully share some insights from my career so far. So as was described, I trained and I went to university, trained and qualified in Scotland. Always thought doing law would be an interesting degree subject. In my year, about a third of my degree, there's about 200 of us, I think, in the year, and about a third of us didn't go on to be lawyers and went into business, but sort of 2/3 did. I don't know what the ratio is now, but there was a buoyant job market and lots of opportunities for graduates, whether you wanted to be a lawyer or not at that point. But I did want to be a lawyer. I did work experience. In one summer, I kind of blitzed it and did three work experiences in one summer to try and work out what kind of lawyer I would like to be, and settled on being a commercial lawyer. Now, because I'd studied Scots law in Scotland, I felt very much qualified and ready for a career in Scotland, and didn't really think at that point that I would be able to go to London, that it would be, you know, transferable degree, transferable skills as such, and settled into training and qualified life in Glasgow and Edinburgh. Very much enjoyed it. I did 3 seats in my training contract in litigation first, which is a similar story to Lee, really. I thought each time I changed seats, I thought, this is it, I found it. I loved litigation. It was a lot of fun. I liked the fact that you could kind of master the procedure, but every case was different. Every set of facts was different. Every area of the law you were working in was different. Really enjoyed that. And then I did property and just fell in love with the industry. It's a really fun industry and very, very tangible for obvious reasons. And I thought, for me anyway, I'd much rather see a building go up than exchange a share certificate at the end of a deal. It's just much more tangible and interesting. So I loved real estate. And then I finished off with 9 months in the Edinburgh office, supposedly in corporate, but ending up just gravitating towards doing more and more real estate. So I had a very real estate heavy training contract and loved it, and qualified with the firm. And at that point, real estate was the sort of 50-55% of what they did. It was the most prestigious area in the firm. And I just really wanted to qualify there and enjoyed it. But then about a year or so after qualifying, I thought, I kind of know a lot of people in this market already. And I wonder if there's a slightly bigger world out there. And I wonder if I could do something different for a while when I am, you know, young and I don't have a mortgage and I'm not tied to anything. And why don't I just have a look? And I kind of landed upon the idea of going to London. And my game plan then, as I described to my mother, was doing 3 years or so in London, building the most amazing CV, and then waltzing back up to Scotland for my pick of jobs. That was my game plan, and that was the extent of it. And she said to me, as mothers always do, they always know best. She said to me, "You won't be back. You'll love it, and you'll stay there, and you'll never come back." Not in an emotional way, just in a sort of factual way. And she was right. And I really, really did enjoy the work. I applied to several Magic Circle firms, as they're known in the city in London. I chose to go to Slaughter and May. I just really liked the partners interviewing me, really liked the nature and quality of the work that they had on offer, and didn't really look back. You know, I did build my CV, did some amazing jobs, but I didn't want to leave. I found it very intoxicating, very addictive, very interesting. You know, really great, sophisticated, inspirational clients, brilliant colleagues, headline deals every day. And yeah, it is intense and it's hard work, but it's really, really interesting. And I just very much enjoyed it. And so before I knew it, somehow I was a partner aged 31, first female partner in the group, and running, you know, these massive deals. And highlights for me, I have a big interest in football, and I've done a number of sports stadia for Premier League football clubs. So we acted for Arsenal on their new stadium, and currently actually acting for Everton on their new stadium in Liverpool, which got planning permission just last week. So doing these, you know, big infrastructure projects in the UK and indeed global portfolio deals, global real estate deals, and, you know, being able over time to, for example, take a riverboat down the River Thames and say, you know, you help to build that and to fund that and to lease that and to demolish that is really, really fantastic. And just to have that little involvement on the landscape and to understand about the architecture of projects, to understand, for example, how to create atmosphere in a football stadium by the angling of the seats and all that kind of techie geeky stuff, I'm really interested in. And so I just love the industry, and I've really, really enjoyed it, and I still enjoy it. And I'm very lucky to say that. And I think that's, you know, that's what we should aim for. You know, if you're not enjoying it and you're not happy, then have those honest conversations with yourself as you would a friend, and ask yourself what you can do to improve that. I know that the options aren't always there. I appreciate that, but to really think through, you know, to test yourself and have those career discussions with yourself as to whether you're enjoying it, and if not, what you might want to do instead and move on to or move across to, and just keep kind of making sure that you're getting that back from your career. You know, it's a relationship in effect. It's a two-way thing. You want to enjoy it. It's really what it's all about. You do it for a long time. So enjoying it, I think, is really critical. While I was in London, another reason I didn't move home, of course, is I met my husband. We have 2 children, 2 boys who are now aged 12 and 10. So that's busy. But they're fantastic. Yeah, I've got lots of friends in London. I love the theatres, the restaurants in normal times when they're open. I love the culture, the history, everything that you can do in London. It's a real 24/7 city. I love that. It's a really interesting, great place to be, and you can escape very easily to the countryside if you want to, and I do. So yeah, it's a busy life for sure, but one that I very much enjoy. As well as the sort of fee earning client side work that I've been involved with over the years, I've done quite a lot with the firm. It's quite easy, I think, to think that you might be promoted and then just sort of do the same thing for X years thereafter. But I've made sure that I keep my interest up in the sort of non-chargeable side as well. So in addition to sort of running our group and being responsible for HR matters, our trainees, development of our lawyers. I also do a lot of recruitment, so I'm responsible for recruitment from the Scottish universities for the firm, various HR projects I'm involved with. I look after the firm's premises. I've volunteered with the 30% Club. I've done mentoring, reverse mentoring. I've been involved with the firm's Collaborate programme, which is a legal IT startup support programme, which I sponsored last year. And this year I'm going to become a new diversity partner for the firm. So I've kind of followed my interest there as well. And I think, again, that's important, just to make sure that you are pursuing passions and interests that are important to you and mean something to you. And I've really enjoyed that side as well. It's not just about, doing deals. It's about getting involved in all the various initiatives that are on offer in big firms and making sure that you can hopefully add something there. In terms of challenges, I mean, I agree with Lee. We work in the same industry. You often are the only women in the room in a meeting. Maybe I'm a natural overperformer, I'm not sure, but I always quite enjoyed that because people remember you, whether you've got red hair or you're really tall or you're the only woman or whatever the distinguishing feature about you might be. People remember you. They're not going to remember a room of 20 white, male, pale, stale, 50-something lawyers. It's not going to have the same impact. So if you do find yourself to be the only woman in the room, enjoy it, but don't accept it because it isn't right and you shouldn't be, but actually turn it into a positive in that moment. But then obviously think about what we can do as an industry and as a profession to change that. And, I do intend to work very hard on that when I become diversity partner for our firm this year, and think about how we can change that. And we have lots of projects, certainly in our firm, to address that. And to my mind, it's not just about being a leader in your career possible, it's about making it attractive. And women have got to want to do it. And that's the key. You've got to have role models, you've got to have encouragement, you've got to have sponsors, you've got to want to do this and find the work sufficiently interesting to take you away from other things that you could be doing instead, to make you want to do this, as well as having a family at the same time and pursuing other interests. So that to me is the key. And I hope that, hopefully you can hear that I do really, really enjoy my job, but I also enjoy having an extremely busy life. I think it's an interesting one, and a very rewarding one. And that's, I think, something I'm proud of. The challenge, I think, it is just how busy it can be sometimes. You need to be, really meticulous about your diary. You need to be mega organized. There's not much spontaneity. It's, you can't be in two places at once, but you need to organize yourself extremely efficiently. You need to learn to say no, but you also need to learn to say yes to the things that are interesting and matter to you. But not be frightened to say no when you think that's not something in my top 5 or 10, and I'm going to spend my interest and my energy and my time on something more important to me, where I can still add value and give back. What else would I say? I think we wanted to cover, didn't we, the pandemic and how I've found that, and I think it's been hard, hasn't it, for everybody in different ways. I think in our firm, we've found our trainees and junior lawyers have struggled most. Some of them are in, either living on their own or in shared flats. They don't, they're sociable, they're young, they've come to London in a large trainee intake to have that socializing and to have that network and that collegiate sort of infrastructure around them, and they don't have it. They're at home, and some of our new trainees have never been to our building yet, are now well into their second seats, if not third seats. It's been really tough, and I think it will have an impact on all of us and our mental health. And I agree with what Lee said there, but at the same time, hopefully, we do share more now, don't we? We are able and willing to say if we're having a bad day or a busy day, or you're feeling a bit low, all the uncertainty necessarily from the government and from global health organizations about when and how we're going to conquer this virus, that does, you know, play on our minds, and it is difficult to manage, I think, and that has an effect on us as human beings, on all of us. So I think just being a bit more honest, you know, about how we're feeling on a day-to-day basis, and not trying to be sort of too jocular or over positive about it. You know, it is tough for everybody, and just having that time with people, I think, to discuss and hopefully plan for a brighter future ahead. Hopefully sometime this calendar year, things will get better. That's certainly the plan, but it has been tough, but I think there are some really useful learnings from it in terms of the way we communicate, in terms of establishing proof that we can and do work well from home and that deals get done. But there is not much fun. You know, virtual Christmas parties are rubbish. All the fun has been stripped out of the job, which I used to have, you know, a healthy dose of fun, it's fair to say, in my industry and in my job, and there's not much of that now, and that's quite hard. I think as human beings, we like to socialize, we like to get together, we like to celebrate deals, we like to get to know our clients well, and we can't do that in the same way online. So the sooner we can get back to that, the better, I think. I think maybe that's more or less it. I think I'm probably bang on time, hopefully in 15 minutes. So I look forward at the end to receiving any Q&A that may be coming my way, but I will now hand over to the keynote speaker for the evening, Lady Hale. No doubt, presumably Leila or Lucy via you first. So thank you everyone, and look forward to speaking at the end.
Thank you so much, Jane, for that. I really like that, make an impact and turn it into a positive. So definitely something to think about and put into our own lives, actually. So just moving on then to our final speaker, who is Lady Hale of Richmond, who graduated from the University of Cambridge and was the first female to study law from her school at Cambridge. Lady Hale is the past president of the UK Supreme Court and the first female president. Rather appropriately, Lady Hale's motto for the coat of arms for her title, Baroness Hale of Richmond, is "Women are equal to everything." She's also known for actively pursuing children's rights and is a non-permanent judge of the Court of Final Appeal of Hong Kong. Lady Hale also, done many a thing, wrote a book on mental health law, which I believe is in its 6th edition. So it is fantastic to welcome her tonight to our event supporting Sam H. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Lady Hale. Oh, sorry, Lady Hale, I think you've popped yourself on mute there. There we go.
Gone. Sorry. Anyway, there we are. And I was just saying how great it is to be here with you all, and especially to listen to those two really inspirational young women who I hope will encourage everybody here. And the message that I took from both of them, which is one that I always try and emphasize, which is enjoy yourself. Because if you enjoy what you're doing, you will work hard at it and you will be the best you can be at it. But if you don't like it, you won't, and you won't. So that's a very important message. It's also great to be having this event in such a good cause, the cause of mental health in Scotland. I have, as you say, had a lot to do with mental health law over my career. And indeed, yesterday, one of the events I went to celebrating International Women's Day was an event put on by the Royal College of Psychiatrists celebrating the contribution of women psychiatrists to the advancement of mental health. And it's quite clear that they do bring something which is just that little bit different from what the men bring. Greater empathy, a greater willingness to listen, a greater willingness to form a relationship with their patients and so on. And I expect that is true of women lawyers too. So think how much has changed since I graduated in 1966 and qualified as a barrister in 1969. There were 6 of us studying law at the University of Cambridge in my year, over 100 men, 3 women's colleges and 21 men's colleges. Now that a bit resonates with what Jane was saying. It can be quite an advantage to be the only woman in the room or to be one of so few women in the university. It does bring with it quite a lot of fun, but of course it isn't right. And of course it was addressed, and now the figures are much closer to parity, not only in the University of Cambridge, but also, of course, entering the legal profession. Because when I entered the legal profession, I didn't know how few women there were in it, but there were remarkably few, only about 4%, both barristers and solicitors. I'm not sure, would it have put me off if I'd known? I don't think so. It would probably have just been another challenge, but I do wonder sometimes. Well, things have changed a huge amount since then. We've got equal or more than equal numbers of women coming into the legal profession in England, and I expect that's true in Scotland too. We have increasing numbers of women in the judiciary, over a third at the lower ranks of the judiciary, a quarter in the High Court and Court of Appeal, and until I retired, we even got ourselves up to a quarter in the Supreme Court. But unfortunately, we've gone back down to 2 out of 12 now, and goodness knows what will happen next year when Lady Arden has to retire. So things have improved, but it just goes to show that there are still problems at what is seen as the top of the profession. I think that's true in the Magic Circle firms, though I'm absolutely certain that Jane will get right to the top of her firm and will stay there, and that she will, in her diversity role, improve the proportion of women at the top of her firm. But in fact, women equity partners in the Magic Circle firms are obviously, they're similarly a sort of percentage similar to the women in the higher echelons of the judiciary. And of course, there are all sorts of reasons for that. But a lot of it has to do with the difficulties of combining that sort of career with domestic responsibilities. I was asked very recently by a bar student at Gray's Inn. She said, "Can we have it all?" And it was actually quite a difficult question to answer, because yes, we can, and I did, but you do need to have a lot of favorable circumstances, don't you? You have to have, it's useful if you've got a good income, because then you can live in a convenient place for your place of work, whether it's the Inns of Courts or whether it's Slaughter and May's offices in the city, etc. You can pay for good childcare. You can pay for your children to go to boarding school if that's what you want. So it does depend a lot on the area of practice that you're in. And of course, the most important thing for most of us is to have a really supportive partner. Ruth Bader Ginsburg always used to say that the best decision in her life was the man she married. And she was right, of course, because he was a huge support to her. But we can't all have that. And so it's difficult to have it all. And we have to recognize how difficult it is and to look for solutions. And for firms to look for solutions in the...
Okay.
I think we're having a concrete example of that, aren't we, as I speak. So there obviously is a need for firms to look into how they organize themselves so that they can make life easier in that. And of course, it has become a lot more difficult in the pandemic. I don't know exactly how things have been going on in Scotland. In England, for a while, jury trials ground to a halt, and there were none. And this was terrible because there was already a large backlog and people having to spend far too long in custody time limits being exceeded regularly. They have now gone back to doing jury trials. They have organised things so that they can do it with everybody properly socially distanced. I don't know what it must feel like to be on a jury and keeping social distance. I think that must have a big effect on the collegiality of the jury experience, but there we are. But they are still all doing it in courts physically. They're not contemplating doing it remotely. In the family courts, they instantly went over to remote working for the cases that couldn't wait. And of course, there are loads of things that can be done remotely. You can do what we call directions hearings, case management matters. You can do non-contentious matters, agreed orders in, for example, financial provision cases. You can do all that. You can do things that just depend upon advocates' submissions. And so financial cases, the presumption is that they will be done remotely. But the difficulty is, what do you do with witness actions, hearings that require people to be examined and cross-examined? Because we all know that it feels very different doing that face-to-face than remotely. They have been doing it remotely, but I cannot believe that it's anything like as satisfactory as doing it face-to-face. And also in a family case, you don't get the vibes that go with being in the courtroom. You know, you litigators will know, if you look around a courtroom, you can get the feeling for how something is going down. Even in the Supreme Court, you can get a feeling for how something is going down because we can see what's going on behind counsel. And you can see whether the client or the solicitor is horrified by what counsel has just said. And that there are things that happen in courtrooms that really you can't replicate in the sort of setup that we've got now. And the other problems that we're having are things like, sometimes, what about the clients who really don't have access to the technology and who have to do it on a phone, possibly just by audio? Imagine having your children taken away from you by audio. This just seems to me to be totally horrific. And they don't know what they've got to be doing. Litigants in person have a particular difficulty. So the pandemic in England has caused all sorts of problems. There are good things about it. Obviously, working from home has got its advantages. I mean, here I'm at home, but I'm actually talking to you all in Scotland. This is wonderful. There are very good things that we can do. But I cannot imagine what it must be like trying to run a practice from home when your children aren't at school. So you're supposed to be homeschooling them as well. I'm wondering whether Jane has had this experience. I mean, your energy is obviously quite remarkable, but how you manage a busy practice plus homeschooling, I just can't imagine. So the women, I think, are bearing much more of the brunt of this than the men are. I'm not saying the men aren't suffering too, but all the evidence in England, at least, is that the women are suffering even more from the men with having to put all this together. But there we are. We hope we will learn to improve our processes and then get back to what really has to be done in court and must be done face to face once we are able to meet in person once more. But even so, in England, we do have very considerable problems with publicly funded legal practice. I'm not quite sure whether they're quite as severe in Scotland as they are in England, but public funding for legal services of all kinds has been taken away from a large range of material, and that makes it very hard. And it tends to be the women who are concentrated in the publicly funded areas of the law. It's very unusual to come to a panel which has got 2 women in construction and real estate rather than in the what I call poor folks law, in which so many women are concentrated and they're having it so much harder. But there is a lot we can learn from this situation. We can move on. And the other thing that's positive that I would like to put over is that there are a lot more law jobs than private practice. We tend to think in terms of self-employed practice at the bar or self-employed practice in a firm of solicitors. In your case is large firms of solicitors or small firms of solicitors or medium-sized firms of solicitors. But in fact, out there are a lot of other jobs for lawyers to do. And given that there are decreasing numbers of conventional law jobs, I always like to encourage people to think creatively about what they might do with their legal skills and go into public sector lawyering, whether in government or in local authorities or in various public sector organizations, or into regulation. There are loads of law jobs in regulation, or of course into law teaching, or into being in-house counsel in commerce, finance, and industry. There is a huge range of stuff to be done. And I have to finish because I'm under very, very strict instructions from the personnel officer at the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom to tell everyone that they have just been advertising for judicial assistants to the justices of the Supreme Court. These are fixed-term contracts for just under a year. Guess why? But to me, the salary is quite eye-watering. But then that shows how old I am, because it's over £37,000 a year. You have to be qualified, professionally qualified, and really quite bright. But it is a wonderful job, and it gives you a huge insight, especially if you're thinking of going into litigation of any sort. Or becoming an advocate of any sort, because you will learn more about high quality advocacy in the Supreme Court than you will in any other place, even, I guess, in Parliament House in Edinburgh. So there's my plug. Think of applying for that. Thank you.
Thank you to Lady Hale for that fascinating insight into some of the challenges facing the courts since the pandemic and your words of wisdom. It was truly inspirational to hear and read about the various glass ceilings that you've broken through during your career, and it does give me optimism looking forward. Thank you again to Lady Hale. Before we move to our question and answer session, I just want to say a huge thank you again to all of our speakers tonight. I'm sure everyone will agree with me that their passion and enthusiasm has really shown through during their presentations. And it's a real honour to be co-chairing this event tonight alongside such inspiring women. And looking at our panel, it is very clear that there is no role in the legal profession that is beyond our reach. Turning then to our question and answer session, there's a few that have come through in advance, and then we will turn to the questions that have come through on the chat. But if you do have any questions, there's still time, put them in the chat box and we will get through as many as we can. Our first question has been touched on to some extent. So turning to Jane, first of all, what has been your proudest achievement throughout your career, and what has been your greatest challenge?
Proudest achievement career-wise was probably attending the first match of the new season in Arsenal's Emirates Stadium, having been part of constructing it, and seeing the team run out and just knowing that you were a part of it. It was real sort of shiver up the spine stuff. You get a reduced version of that when you see headlines on the FT and deals that you've done. But standing in the asset was my proudest moment, I think. Greatest challenges, I think what I didn't realise perhaps at law school was that being a solicitor and building client relationships, it's a massive people job. And I think a lot of good lawyers have perhaps, I certainly know that I do, haven't kind of overdeveloped needs to be liked. Is a polite way of saying it. And you know, you can't get on with everyone though. And I think that takes some maturity and some years to understand. So if a client, you know, at a pitch chooses to go to another firm, or within your own firm chooses to work with another partner or another team, that still smarts, that still hurts. You want everyone to like you. And you remember the 1 out of 100 who've decided to go elsewhere, whatever the statistic is. And it's kind of similar to imposter syndrome, I think. You sort of focus on the negative sometimes, don't you? And this is a people business. And as I say, you can't get on with everyone. So I think challenges have been just accepting that sometimes when it happens, because it happens to everybody. And I think it probably happens to men much more, and they shrug it off. But women, I think, generally care more about that. But I've learned to develop in that sense a thick skin, I think, and think that's fine. You know, some people click more than others, and we are where we are. But that's been hard, I think, as a challenge.
Thank you. Lady Hill, we'll come to you next.
What, this was the question, the proudest achievement? Was that the question?
That's right. Your proudest achievement and your greatest challenge.
Oh, right. Well, they're the same thing. Proudest achievement is becoming President of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, and greatest challenge was being President of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, I think, if I'm honest about it. It is, of course, the top judging job in the United Kingdom. It's enormously fascinating, very enjoyable. And one of the things that I have liked about the Supreme Court, and before that the House of Lords, was that you get to hear cases not only from England, but also from Northern Ireland, and even more from Scotland, because the Scottish cases are often some of the most fascinating ones. And of course, the great thing with the big case that we had in September 2019, the prorogation case, which obviously is the biggest case that I've had to deal with, we had the wonderful challenge of one decision from the Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales and his court, and a completely opposite decision from the Lord President and his court. They couldn't both be right. Either Parliament had been validly prorogued or it had not, and we had to choose between them. And I, for one, was extremely grateful to Scotland for having reached the conclusion that they did.
Thank you, Lady Hill. And Lee?
Yes, so I think proudest achievement probably was winning that Rising Star Award last year. I was a nominee for the award for about a year because it kept getting postponed because of COVID. And it's just a shame in a way that it was virtual. I think, as Layla said in the intro, it was the first virtual one. I'm so glad it went ahead, but definitely not as much champagne as would have been had normally. Still some champagne, but not as much. And my biggest challenge, I mean, I think as a sort of broader challenge is probably that imposter syndrome one I talked about before. Just sort of challenging yourself every day that you can do this and you're able to do that. And I think that surprises some people because I can come across quite confident, but I think everyone's battling that behind closed doors. So I think that's a wider one. But I think in my career, I've had some really challenging cases with really challenging timescales. But I think it comes back to what Jane was saying earlier in Lady Hale, it's that you work for things that you enjoy. And I do genuinely enjoy my job. And it can be frantic and it's a lot of work, but it's just so satisfying when it all comes together. And I've had some really good results throughout my career as well for clients and just sharing their delight as well. So I think it's challenging as you go through it, but you can see a way out and it's rewarding work.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lee. I think we'll start again with you, Lee, for the next question, kind of follows on from that. So the question is, a challenge for junior members of the profession can be gaining experience out with their day job. What advice could you give to attendees who want to expand their skill set, and what are the benefits of doing so?
So I think there's so much opportunity to expand your skill set, either by doing sort of events online like webinars and things like that, or by joining groups such as SYLA, or I joined the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, like I said before, and that's just been a great experience. It's opened you up, because I'm involved in the committee and involved in CIR. It means I've been involved in then like spin-off projects, like working with the Law Society to reach out to local faculties and go out to areas that don't usually get people visiting to give training to explain ADR, or being on this, I'm currently involved in the Collaborative Partnership for Scotland, which is about promoting and exploring ADR, especially coming up to the big arbitration conference, ICA, that's been rescheduled twice, but is hopefully taking place in Scotland in September. So whether it's getting involved in like bodies like that, or whether it's just doing something in your firm or in your business, like I mentioned, the gender focus group and other groups that we've got internally at ShepWed, or go and volunteer. You know, Citizens Advice is always looking for people to help. We have a Law Works thing at ShepWed where we go and volunteer, give advice. There really is just so many things to do, and I think definitely do it. Like, you can only get good things from doing that.
Perfect. And then Lady Hale, do you have anything to add to that as well?
No, not really. I agree with that. Of course. Yes. Thank you.
Wonderful.
There's a lot of pro bono opportunities as well, which are very much needed, again, in England, because of the reduction in publicly funded legal services. So, and that is something that's very interesting to do and gives you a lot of valuable experience.
Definitely. And Jane, do you have anything?
No, I not really. I agree. You know, volunteer and look for those opportunities, and then you will find them. And the worst that can happen is, you know, you dust yourself down, go for the next one.
The next question we have is for Lady Hale, and it ties in with some of the questions we've had on the chat as well. Do you think the legal profession in terms of judicial appointment has improved for women since you were appointed to the Supreme Court, and what more is still to be done?
Well, it has definitely improved over the last 2 decades. People began to realize that there was a problem and something had to be done about it. Not positive discrimination, I'm not in favor of that. I'm not in favor of fixed quotas or anything like that, but I am in favor of recognizing that there's a problem and thinking what might be done. And the first key to trying to solve it is open and transparent appointment systems. And we have had those, I think, throughout the United Kingdom since the 2005 Constitutional Reform Act came into force. You had a Judicial Appointments Board in Scotland before we had a Judicial Appointments Commission in England. But now we've got appointing commissions which are attempting to do things on an open and transparent way, which means that people can apply. It means that decisions can be made on an objective basis rather than who knows whose shoulder to tap. And that has to be a good thing. There is a continuing problem with the assumption about who gets what sort of judging jobs. And I imagine that that is just as much a problem in Scotland, maybe even more a problem in Scotland than it is in England. And I say that because the Scottish bar is so small. And if you assume that the top judging jobs go to members of the Scottish bar, they don't have to, but I think if you assume that they do, and that they're the best qualified people for it, well, you are going to get a more restricted group of people who are thought to be eligible for. I don't mean statutorily eligible, I mean eligible and appointable. The English bar is, of course, a great deal larger, and that's not quite such a problem, but it remains something of a problem. So there are things still to be done. One of the things I want done is for the Judicial Appointments Commission to be fishing in those pools which consist of lots of able women who have gone into other jobs than self-employed practice, either at the bar or as a solicitor, because of the problems of, it's not so much work-life balance as work-work balance. You know, work in the home and work outside the home balance. And they are very able people, and they could become good judges. So there's quite a lot of work still to be done. But what I like about the present situation is that people think it should be done, which is a big change from 2 decades ago.
Perfect, thank you. And following on from that last question, I think probably for Jane and Lee, what do you think would help more women secure senior leadership roles? Perhaps onto Jane, this is probably quite relevant for your new role in diversity.
I think most firms aim to and actually achieve a 50-50 recruitment policy from university. It's never a problem at that stage. Women do very well at university, and there's plenty of applications and plenty of strong applications, and it's very easy to fill 50% or more than 50% with women trainees. The challenge is keeping those lawyers into becoming senior lawyers and being eligible, therefore, for promotion. Certainly, I'm talking about sort of the private practice system. And that saddens me, because no other industry really has such a quick trajectory as private practice law. You go from being a newly qualified lawyer to a senior lawyer in 5 years. It's nothing. Other industries, in my clients' industries, they're senior when they're in their 40s and not before. Not in the law. You are a senior lawyer really quickly from joining from university. So it shouldn't be that difficult to keep people there for, say, 7, 8, 9 years at the point at which they can be considered for partnership, hopefully. But somehow it is. And that does sadden me. And it's those years that we need to look at, because once people are eligible for promotion, they can be considered fairly for promotion, and they will survive and thrive in a meritocracy, but they'll never be considered if they don't get there. So it's about retaining people through to that point where they can be considered for promotion fairly at the same time as their male counterparts, because it'd be unfair to do otherwise. But how do we get women to that point? How do we keep them through their late 20s and early 30s, usually at that point? And there are very many different, ideas on that. And I don't claim to have all the answers, and one size certainly doesn't fit all. But I think again, it's sponsorship, it's mentoring, it's fair job allocation, it's mature, thoughtful development and appraisal systems. It's making sure that if a female candidate wants to have children, they can have children, and they can take some time out and they can come back and they can continue that journey. There's not a sort of one-off window for being promoted. It can happen later if they want it to. Equally, it can happen early if they want it to. Up to that women to decide when they want to have children. It's a very personal decision, and not one for the firm to make. It's one for them to make. But that journey should be there, that possibility should be there for them. But again, I think it comes back to what we all said before. It's about enjoying the role. They will be good at it if they enjoy it. And if they enjoy it, they'll want to be there. So it's up to us as employers and colleagues to make that job interesting and to keep women interested. And that I think is the easy bit, actually. The difficult bit is overcoming other softer, more nebulous issues like imposter syndrome, like, can I really have it all? Women asking themselves, can I do this? Can I have 2 jobs? Can I be a mother and a full-time busy lawyer? How will I achieve that? It all looks very difficult for me. And then it's about having those role models, isn't it, of other women who not only do it, but enjoy doing so and want to do so and want that sort of full, rich life. But it is difficult.
With all of that, and I think we were having quite interesting discussions about that just in my team not that long ago, because it's exactly that, Jane. It's how do you keep women so that they can be there? Because I don't think there is an issue getting into the profession anymore, and that's contrasted with what Lady Hale was talking about and her experiences. I mean, now I think at university it was definitely almost like a 60-40 split for women, and I think in my traineeship year it was either, I think it was just over half women. It was slightly more women than men. But you look forward to the senior roles and it's still predominantly male. And why is that? And a lot of like good senior women get so far and then decide they don't want the partnership. They want to do something else. And that comes into what Lady Hale was saying earlier. There's so many opportunities in the industry to go in-house or to work on a particular project. Or, I mean, it's great in one way. I mean, we've got more opportunities now than we ever did. But that is a challenge for private practice when people look at partners and depending on, you know, what they want to do, they think, actually, is that for me? So it's an absolute duty that I think senior women need to have in firms, is to be role models and to make the opportunities look attractive and to really sell that you can do this and still have a life and still do everything else. And I think that's massively important. And although I do love my job and I do work a lot, I do also have a life and do lots of things out of work. And I'm always quite keen to get that across. You know, we're a work hard team, but we're not interested in you only working. And I think the partner I work for has that attitude. He has a family and, you know, has interests out of the workplace. I think that's we have to be good role models and good examples to junior women and men as well. Otherwise, the whole model will not work. So I just echo everything that you've said, and I think it's something that, you know, we're having to look at the moment.
Thank you very much to you both for that input. The next question has come through on the chat, and if I could ask Lee to answer this, I know that you've touched on this during your presentation. Does imposter syndrome ever go away?
I don't think so. I think you manage it better. You tell the little voice in your head to be quiet. I think you become more confident in your ability, and it matters less maybe what other people around think of you, and you care more about your own opinion. But I'd be lying if I said I still didn't care about other people's opinion. I echoed everything Jane said earlier about that point. I was interested to hear a very experienced woman solicitor in our firm mention imposter syndrome and say that she still feels like that now, and that actually gave me comfort. Though that I think it's that way that you become a trainee and you think you're meant to know everything, and then you realise that we're all learning, and actually that's a good thing. You don't want to be complacent. You want to push yourself. So it's all about balance. Just don't let it overcome you.
I agree with that. And I would say the trick is, I think, to realise that most human beings have imposter syndrome, and that perhaps if you never have imposter syndrome, isn't that the definition of arrogance, possibly, which you don't want to be. So, you know, we recruit 80 trainees a year in our firm. They all have firsts or good 2-1s from Russell Group universities. They've all been in the top 5% of the year at school and the top 5, possibly 8% of their year at university. They're all incredibly accomplished, great CVs, interview very well, very, very, very credible, competent people. They pretty much all have imposter syndrome. and we all do at different moments in our lives. And I think, you know, what you can do is read the memoirs or autobiographies of really inspiring people who you think are sort of bulletproof. You know, and I've read accounts of, you know, how, for example, Barack Obama prepared himself for his really inspiring, amazing speeches that he made as US president. And, you know, he was sometimes shaking under the lectern, but he channeled those nerves, and he channeled that challenge though to produce the most amazing public speeches. And I think that's what imposter syndrome is all about. It's you care, you're conscientious, you're feeling insecure because you want to do a good job and you want to perform. So let's channel that into a really positive outcome and performance, and know all the while that 99% of the people around you, if they're not feeling it in that moment, they'll probably have it in that day or that week or that month. It's normal human behavior to doubt ourselves, particularly I think in the UK. It's quite a British thing. So don't worry, don't see it as an alien feeling. Channel it and accept it and embrace it and use it to drive you forward, I think.
Sorry, Jane, to ask you to speak again, but we have another question directed at you. So the question is, can you describe how you balance having young children with your career, and what support did you have? How did you find, obviously, managing to work full time, as well as, you know, perhaps even the guilt of being away from your children at times?
Oh, sure, yeah. I remember the first maternity leave, so I had sort of 5 months off with my first son, and I went back and he was still a baby and he had no idea, no concept of time, and it was easier than the second time I went back, when I had a 2-year-old, the first one, and a baby with no concept of time. And as I was trying to leave, the 2-year-old was saying, "Let's go to the park today, mummy, let's go and buy an ice cream and go swimming." No, sorry, I've got to go into the office. It was horrible explaining to a toddler. And as I was walking down the road, I realized I hadn't actually been apart from my 5-month-old second baby ever. I even took him to the hairdresser. So I thought, oh, I felt like I was leaving my right arm behind. I had to stop and cry. It was horrible, horrible, horrible. But then I realized the conversation I had with my 2-year-old was, "You've got no idea how expensive ice cream is. Do you want mommy to go to work so that you can have ice cream, or do you want her to stay home and have no ice cream?" He was like, "Off you go, see you later." I want the ice cream. So, you know, obviously doesn't believe that now. He's got a concept of that the ice cream is not the most expensive product in the world. But you know, I want him to remember. I want both of my sons to remember when hopefully, you know, they get married or find partners and settle down. I want them to remember that, and maybe they'll have daughters. I want them to expect their partners and their daughters to do well and to make their own choices. And I want to bring them up thinking that's normal. So as Lady Hale said earlier, you know, the trick also, of course, is to find the right partner for yourself to support your career. My husband does much more of the childcare than I do, and I'm very grateful for that, and more of the homeschooling than I did, I must also say and confess. But yeah, you do feel guilty. It is hard, but ultimately you're setting them a really good example, I think, for their futures. And before you know it, they're not babies saying, "Let's go swimming, mummy, and have ice cream." They are teenagers wanting, you know, already mine want, they've got their own friends, their own clubs, their own sports, their own lives. And, you know, they don't live in your pocket anymore. That is such a short window, just a few years in your career, which will be, you know, possibly 45, 50 years long. You know, to my mind, it's illogical to sacrifice that career for just a few years, which your child very quickly grows out of. And I think it's much more valuable for them and for you, I think, to set them that example. But I fully accept it's very difficult to leave small children when they want you to stay with them. It absolutely is.
Thank you, Jane. The next question is another one through from the chat. If I can put it to everyone, but begin with Lady Hale. What is the one thing / piece of advice that you wished you had known when you were first starting your career?
Well, that is a good question, isn't it? And I don't know the answer to it. Piece of advice that I wish I'd known. Oh dear, what piece of advice? Probably not to bother about all the things we have been bothering about this evening. I mean, I went through definitely the bother about whether I should go back to work immediately after having my daughter, because in my generation, there was still a very strong feeling that you had to be with them for the first full time, for the first 2 or 3 years of their life. And so it was quite rare to go out and go straight back to work, which I did. And I must admit, I was desperate to get back to work. I mean, I didn't like leaving my daughter, but I was desperate to get back to work. So, and I was, of course, fortunate because I was a university teacher, and you can do a lot of work from home as a university teacher. So the balance was quite good. But I think now, after this evening, I'm going to say that I wish I had known Jane's piece of advice, that your children are only babies and toddlers for a remarkably short amount of time, and that you've got the whole of your career, and indeed they've got the whole of the rest of their growing up period, when you can have a much more balanced relationship with them. And I don't think my daughter regrets at all that I was a career woman. I think she's really quite proud of me, just as I'm proud of her. So thank you, Jane. That's a very good piece of advice. I wish I'd had it back in the 1960s. Thank you.
Lee, do you have anything to add?
I think probably a piece of advice is quite useful, is that you're not expected to know everything about everything right at the beginning of your career, that it's okay to learn, it's okay to make mistakes as long as they're manageable mistakes, and you deal with them appropriately, and you are learning and everybody understands that. And actually it's when you stop learning and think you know everything that, I think it was one of the partner I worked for said, that's when you've got a problem. If you think you know everything, well, I think you need to quit because that's when you're not doing your job. You need to see everything as a learning opportunity and take lessons from any case you're involved in or interaction with a client, good or bad. So I think it's just that we're all learning all the time. It's that every day's a school day, and it's genuinely the case.
Thank you. And Jane, do you have anything further to add?
No, I agree with that. Every day is a school day, and I think the key is to enjoy it, as we've said, and to find your own authentic style. You don't need to. You can observe a lot of other people around you who you admire, or perhaps you don't, and learn from them, but develop your own style and have confidence in that over time. That's what you aspire to find your own way of doing the job, and putting your own stamp on things, which is really rewarding.
Perfect. I think we'll just finish on one last question, and that is for Lady Hale. So I think particularly in the legal profession, it's quite commonplace for people with the competition that's on offer, for people to receive some knockbacks in their career, or perhaps rejection stages, quite early on in your career at traineeship stage. Do you have any advice for our attendees on how to kind of cope with that at all?
Well, I think we have all had setbacks, knockbacks, rejections at some stage in our careers. Mine came when I was becoming quite a senior academic, and I was applying for full professorships at universities as close to Manchester as possible, so that I wouldn't have to move house and my daughter's school, etc. And I didn't get them. There were about 3 that I didn't get, which I thought was grossly unjust. I certainly think I should have got 2 of those. But of course, I'm hugely grateful that they turned me down, because certainly if one of them had accepted me, I would still have been there, and I wouldn't have gone on to have the career that I eventually went on to have, because I was so determined that I would prove them wrong and get a good job like the Law Commission, which is what it was, and move on from that. So I think the answer is that you just have not got to let those setbacks put you off your course. There may be things you can learn from them, like why did they knock you back? Were there things that you could have done differently? Or are there different things you should be looking to do? So you just mustn't let them knock you completely off course, because there is no reason why they should. Just think, if the University of X had taken Lady Hale on as a professor in blankety blank, she would never have become the first woman president of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom. And are we glad that she did become the first woman president of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom? Well, probably. So that's my advice.
That's perfect, and a wonderful way to end off our evening, that I think, indeed, anyway. And I think it's so true that just to prove people wrong, I think that's kind of how you've got to treat these things when you do receive a knockback, or certainly how I like to treat it as well. So, that kind of concludes our evening tonight. Thank you once again to all of our speakers. I'm quite certain that hopefully everyone on the call agrees that it has been a really enjoyable and inspiring seminar. and actually a great insight into each individual speaker's career path to date. Unfortunately, as we are all obviously unable to give our speakers a round of applause, I'd just like to personally thank you all so much for your contributions tonight. Thanks to Lee Hurd, Jane Edward and Brian Lady Hale, sorry, losing my words. And thank you as well to our co-chair, Lucy Thornton and Fraser Irvine Sheriff Officers. We would usually as well, unfortunately again, conclude our event with moving on to a drinks reception. So sorry, Jane Edward and Lady Hill, that you're missing out on that tonight. So just like to say a final thank you to all of our attendees tonight for joining us. And I hope that you have found tonight worthwhile. And thanks once again for supporting SAMH tonight. So thank you everyone and take care.